So that was a great lead-on to the afternoon. Not to jump ahead, but in the afternoon we're going to have our meeting at the State Library at 1 o'clock, 1:30, I should say, the boardroom, and we're going to be talking about this session, GA 132, HB 3. Legislation is around forming a data board. The idea of this is essentially codifying the policy of what's been basically in effect with the Treasurer's Office for the last 4 years. And one of the things from that legislation, whether or not it gets passed this year is it might not, but more importantly that as we start meeting and getting together and talking about this, as we carry it forward into the next session so that new House members and new legislators or senators can pick it up and run with it early in the session and hopefully get it passed early. But one of the things that's prominent is account standardization. So your question about being able to compare from city to city would be possible in that case. But obviously it's a long road to get cities to change, so perhaps there's interim solutions of creating mapping layers. There's technology solutions for this. But the desire to put the policy and to keep improving is there, and that's what the afternoon is talking about, next steps. So please join us if you can come over to the State Library.
All right. Is that coming through? Okay, there we go. Perfect. So, well, thanks everybody for being here, and it's an interesting day today. It's not only is it my birthday, which I think is kind of interesting, so I'm glad to be doing a panel on that, but we are seeing some interesting things here at the State House, to say the least. So I think that Sean mentioned about the Data Ohio and unfortunately the checkbook thing. I'm not sure that we even have a Speaker of the House, and we might not for several more months, it looks like. So it's kind of a mess here politically. So, but the great thing about this is that data, something that the Buckeye Institute has been a big fan of for years. We became very well known for our salary database. We were one of the first groups in the state to do that. And then really the Treasurer Mandel, and his entire staff has done an incredibly good job of boosting that and taking it to the next level with salaries and then going to the checkbook. And so this has been a great opportunity. And Catherine and I sometimes come so I'm going to let everybody just kind of say hi here real fast, just introduce yourselves, and we'll kind of dive in, but to some questions about how you guys have interacted and all with the Treasurer's Office and what this all means. So Catherine, why don't I kick it off to you first, and we'll go this way.
Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Terser from Common Cause, and I care about transparency in government because I'm inherently nosy. I want to understand what's happening, and I really believe in that idea of we the people, like that idea, like if in fact we are the people, we are the government, then we're not going to be able to participate in a truly meaningful way unless we actually have information. So I was incredibly pleased that the State Treasurer took on this level of transparency, because I'm just so, when you think about, stacks and stacks of papers or PDFs, and the difference between that and the ability to easily get information, it's visually beautiful. I just think that we are in 2018, and in fact, we deserve at this point to have this information at our fingertips at home, even when we're in our pajamas.
All right, go ahead and just say hello into the crowd there.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Navi. I'm the finance director for the City of Marysville. We introduced the checkbook last year for 2016. In a previous role, I also onboarded this system for a local library here in Central Ohio, and we uploaded 5 years' worth of data at that time as well.
Well, I'm going to kind of start off here by discussing sort of any of the transparency that you had prior to the checkbook for either one of the entities that you have worked with. So I'll start with you, Justin.
Sure. No, thank you. That's a great question. The city previously already had a website section dedicated to transparency. We would publish meeting minutes, board agendas, our monthly financial reports, our CAFR. So we already had a lot of the reporting elements out there, not the itemized, essentially, check register that the Ohio checkbook provides.
Out of curiosity, one of the things I'm sure that it differs across different jurisdictions, but when the Treasurer's Office came to you, did you have any folks within the different entities that you worked with that had concerns about it? And if so, what did you say? How did that operate? How did you manage to overcome any of that?
Sure, that's another great question. My approach on both entity levels was approaching senior management first, discussing the positive impact of publishing this information, and then ensuring them that there's a concept called confidential public information or personal information. So that could be patron records for a library, it could be tax refund information for a city, or even utility information. So I assured everyone that we would have redacted data to safeguard that personal information. And then from there, I approached like a governing body, be it a board of trustees for a library or city council, and actually demoed what was already out there, just to show what the capabilities are. And then I also pointed out in both entities, at the library, we were the fourth in the state to join the checkbook, and then Marysville is the only city in Union County, but we were the first city to join the checkbook as well. So, it's a good public relations effort as well. The Treasurer's Office usually comes out and presents an award or a placard. So it lets the public know that we're open to transparency.
I guess we'll kind of do a little bit of a follow-up since you've still kind of new, kind of having onboarded this stuff. So I guess question is, first of all, do you envision there being any challenges on a technological basis, kind of on an ongoing basis? I mean, obviously, as you get the new data.
No, to be honest, it's a real simple process. I traditionally wait until an audit's done and onboard a whole year's worth of data. The only difficulty is you actually have to go through the data and redact, like a patron record. Another thing we try to do is, we have law enforcement personnel and EMS personnel. I kind of view that we try, if there's a payment to a police officer for a badge or a uniform, we try and redact that data just because we don't want to publish a police officer's home address. But truly, it's a simple process. Really, all you're doing is exporting information to Excel and then just sending it to the state treasurer's office.
So, and I think this is kind of a question probably for both Catherine and Justin about have you encountered individuals, constituents, or just Ohioans in general, for Catherine's perspective, that have said they really love it, what they love about it, what they do with it? Have you had any encountering of that once you've onboarded some of the data?
We have one resident that has a lot of public information requests, but I don't know, he's not especially technology savvy. So, but I view this as a customer service tool as well. It has easy access, anyone can get to it 24/7. But even still, if a resident that's not good with a computer, we'll still help them out to get whatever data they need. And we have a local paper that was very positive, our participation in this program as well. And the other nice thing, I don't know if a lot of end users realize this, there's like an administrative platform where you can track how many people are going on the website per day to see who's actually looking at this information.
Well, that's very
helpful.
Yeah. That's great. Catherine, do you have anything you want to add?
So I know that there are a lot of Ohioans that go to the checkbook with the idea of, hey, I want to understand, I want to understand what this specific agency does. I know after the last budget process, there was this, I had a number of people that said, one of the things that, they passed this enormous budget, it's everything in the kitchen sink, and you read these things and trying to understand what this actually means and like what the money is actually spent on. I think it gives, at least in the cases of a couple folks that I talked to, this opportunity to say, okay, I want to look behind the curtain. One, I'm never going to read the budget that goes on and on and on and on. I know there's some of you out there who actually do this. But for most of us, we're not going to go through and read the entire budget, but having a quick opportunity to even just get a peek behind the curtain, to have some understanding of, hey, this is where they're allocating the funds. This is how it's being spent. I think that this can be, and folks have expressed to me, that you have a better sense that your money is being appropriately spent. When things are more transparent, you might actually have more questions. you know, there's that thing where you might say, well, wait a second, this leads to another question. And I have actually had people say, okay, so I got this information, it led me to wanting more information. And so then you have a question of, like, am I asking for more of a public record? Am I asking for context? And I was like, well, you know what? These different agencies have public information officers. If you actually have a question, and you can actually pose it to them so that you better understand what's going on. I think the other thing is that I heard also that I think is true, is that when you talk to ordinary people, they want to put in a public request for information or a public records request because they don't understand what's going on. But they don't necessarily understand or know how to tailor it. And this actually helps them figure out how to tailor it. And I think that's important because it's like they know what they're interested in. If you have just a little bit more information, you can make a really specific request. Or you might find that information right there.
Actually, and that's actually an interesting point, and I'm glad you raised that because I've heard a couple of times about the public records requests. And so kind of a thing that I'm wondering is, and I don't know if you know off the top of your head, Justin, but have you seen a decline actually in public records requests?
Not necessarily. There's a company called Smart Procure that generally sends out, you know, I think they're gathering vendor data to sell off. Mostly we get those requests, and as I mentioned, we generally will upload data after the audit's done, so they're requesting data, you know, current period. So that hasn't impacted that. But again, we have a whole section of our website dedicated to transparency, so traditionally we haven't received a lot of requests anyways.
Yeah. Well, and actually, interestingly enough, I guess I know in some of my public records requests, even before the treasurer took on this, I remember sometimes it's about more than just the financials, it's about certain equipment things and all, but I remember talking to townships, and I remember getting things on yellow pads. I actually got a public records request on that's still in my office, in one of my file cabinets, and I was asking a question, and the actual public record response that I got, it was from a small township, and so I didn't necessarily expect, you know, the most sophisticated thing, but I got it on like a yellow notepad. They hand wrote out the answer to my question, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily a common theme across the entire state that everybody does that, but I think that's an interesting. It highlights the challenge of the public being able to get access to it, and one of the things that this really does. So. What are there any long-term? I mean, if I mean, obviously the treasurers, there's going to be a new treasurer one way or the other after the election. We're not sure. We don't have the statute yet, so it's not been codified. Hopefully, whoever the new treasurer is will be able to continue to do this. If there are any hiccups there, concerns, do you have any concerns about your ability to be able to maintain this and continue this, or if you know, I mean. Not saying it would, but you know, if the whole thing shut down tomorrow or something like that for some reason because of a change over in administration, how would you address that scenario?
No, thanks for the question. The city's committed to publishing this data year over year going forward. We don't have any plans not to utilize it. For whatever reason, if the site went down, we would probably purchase a system. We use a product called Munis, and they actually sell a module for transparency. So in that hypothetical, we'd probably go to that platform. The nice thing about the checkbook is it's absolutely free. You know, it's really just the time and effort of the fiscal staff to get the data prepared and sent to the state. But, you know, when Treasurer Mandel came out to announce this, one of our council members was excited that it didn't really cost the city anything. You know, on the flip side, I've seen cost estimates for Tyler Technologies, our accounting platform vendor. They would charge us about $25,000 to implement, and then, you know, of course, you have a maintenance fee. So this is a big savings to municipalities and localities in the state to use it.
And I guess, Catherine, obviously you're very involved in different issues across the board, and since you've become so interested in this, and I'm not necessarily projecting that that's going to happen. I certainly am optimistic that irrespective of the outcome of the election, that won't happen. But because it's not codified, there isn't really a rule in place that makes it mandatory. So then, you know, the concern I know I have, at least from the Buckeye Institute's perspective, is would this become a problem, and would this become a problem in some of the jurisdictions that maybe have not been able to do as much and weren't doing as much as Justin was with his organization or cities. And so are you talking to anybody, or do you have any concerns about that, and would you be engaged in that to make sure that that doesn't happen?
So one of the things that I really think about the checkbook is that it makes it really clear that these are our public records. Like many times, we know they're public records, but at the end of the day, the custodian may feel that it's their public records. When you put this all out there, there's that thing of like they truly become our public records, and that we could have access to any time. As a custodian, you're uploading them once a year, but there's that thing of like they truly become the public's. And what that does mean also is that when there are transitions in leadership, we do need to set the stage so that this access, this openness continues. And so, clearly, how shall we put this? I don't know if anyone was looking at Twitter while they were having the conversation earlier.
Nobody was. Nobody was doing that.
You all were paying close attention. I was like, ooh, what's going on? Well, anyway, so we all also would like to be a fly on the wall over the State House, wouldn't we right now?
Probably.
I know. So I guess what I'm leading up to is it's not necessarily clear the path forward, but one of the things that is really clear is if you don't put something actually into law, they can easily fall through the cracks. And I think that most government officials will say they're committed to transparency, but it does take effort, it does take time, it does take a true commitment to transparency. And as I think about, how we have this opportunity to continue this at the Treasurer's Office, I also think we need to be thinking about campaign contributions. Wouldn't it be amazing if the Secretary of State's database was actually so much more, easy to access, easy to...
You don't think it's easy? Oh, sorry. You mean you have to know the exact name of the fund?
I think it's better than it used to be. It's better than it used to be, but as that whole thing, like, for example, you couldn't put in, I would like to know how much Republicans received in 2016 at the state level. I would like to know how much gubernatorial candidates received in the last 3 months. Like, that whole thing where you might say, oh, well, it has to fit a filing period, and there could be some other parameters that make a difference, but we deserve to have better access to this information, and I do think it isn't just about us being engaged, it also reduces corruption to have better information.
Well, and I think Sunlight, what was it, Justice Brandeis, I believe. I think it was Justice Lewis Brandeis.
Digital sunlight in this case.
Digital in this case, but sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And that's, again, something I use that phrase probably every time I testify about this issue in front of the legislature. But I actually want to kind of piggyback a little bit because I do think that we're not big fans. We're a free market think tank. We generally don't like government mandates. We don't like things like that from an institutional perspective. But I do have a concern about what happens as time goes on. You've got this transition that'll come up right away, and Josh has been such a big leader and has had such a great team that's been doing it. But 5 years from now, after 2 more election cycles, and maybe when you get 2 or 3 treasurers down the road, what happens? And how do we make this a long-standing thing? So I guess one of the things I'm kind of hoping kind of comes out of this effort here that Sean's put on, that OpenGov and everybody else has done, is that we maintain that interest in there and that we don't let policymakers lose sight of what's been done. There's a lot of flash when it first starts. I think as time goes on, there's always the challenge of how do you maintain the excitement there. And so I would certainly urge folks to remain engaged. We certainly will from our perspective, but I want to make sure that happens. And I'm glad to see that we have local government partners too that are so positive on it, making essentially committed to doing it irrespective of this particular platform. How am I doing on time, Sean? So do we have some questions here from the audience? I've kind of opened it up there, and I kind of am curious to see what you have for some of for Justin and Catherine, and me for that matter.
Justin, Catherine, Greg, thank you for being here this morning. Justin, you and I have worked together now a couple times over the years. Maybe give everybody a better idea, being at the library before when we first did this, and then now at Marysville. Can you talk about the different processes you went through? Obviously, you had a board of trustees to go through at the library, council and administration work with? Maybe just talk about kind of things that weren't out there in the public, the conversations you had, and how they differed from a library to a city.
Sure, thanks for the question. You know, when you're trying to onboard, you can go through a governing body like a board of trustees and pass a resolution, but you don't necessarily need to. I just thought it was the best approach to go to the city leadership and then discuss what we're planning to do. At the library, we did pass a resolution. At the city, we didn't pass any legislation to adopt this program. But after that, it's really just a short process working with Dan and his staff, getting the data, balancing it, and redacting the information. Once you have to balance it again on the checkbook when it's on a draft site, and then once you're good to go, it's instantaneous. So it's a really nice platform for jurisdictions to use.
Actually, I'm actually kind of curious a little bit about this from a technical standpoint. I could see how the issue worked with the Universal Accounting Network, that the auditor provides to a lot of the different entities. You guys have, I think, a different system than that.
Correct.
Okay. So when you're mapping it out and you're working on that, I guess that kind of, not to get too wonky or technical about it, but how does that? Obviously, there's probably a big difference from the library to a city. But how challenging is that to do that, or was that very straightforward because of the ease of the platform?
For me, it's easy. It's all cash-based accounting, essentially. You're just posting a check online, a cash transaction for an expenditure. At the library, we used a system called eGov, and it was built in the 80s. And it's supported on an Opera web browser that I don't think is ever used anymore.
Wow, I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yeah, but as it was mentioned previously, the software company got pushed back from jurisdictions to actually add an export function to load the data. All you really have, I don't know if anyone here is in accounting at all, but I look at it as a fund as a checking account itself. So really it's just cash in and cash out through a fund. So you just balance out the cash expenditures to the data and you just send it to the state, and that's that simple. To be honest, I mean, it's really just exporting data and just making sure everything numbers tied
You make
together.
it sound so simple. It's amazing that it took so long to get us to this point, actually.
Truly it is. Some other entities, I previously worked for Franklin County. It's a gigantic organization, over 7,000 employees and billions of dollars of expenditures a year, but same concept and even same accounting system that the
Is there
city
any difference
uses.
with bonding and any of that stuff? I guess there's really not, because you have an account that's set aside for paying back the debt and everything else, so it probably is the same kind of
Same,
situation.
you might have a debt service fund, cash
Yeah.
out, principal and interest payments.
And same thing for the pensions, we pay the employees,
everything.
do that, it has
Yep.
its own separate thing, so we don't have any challenges
No,
with that. Yeah.
and a lot of jurisdictions, they have the same kind of general accounts, wages and benefits, capital, materials and supplies, debt service, so it's pretty consistent across the board. When I was at Franklin County to the Upper Arlington Library to the city of Marysville, it's pretty consistent.
So I'm kind of thinking about how can we use data to hold government kind of accountable. I think Catherine sort of alluded to that a little bit, and that's one of our big interests in the long run as well. And so, there's the spending factor. One of the things I'm kind of curious about is the ability, and this might actually be a little more for Catherine maybe than Justin, but as we onboard multiple years of data, I think that it's trends and it's things like that that help people use the data, because that, I guess, it's all good to have all of this. I think this is actually very important, but I think there's actually that next step of how do you use that information and what kind of consumable products are out there as well that maybe the website itself doesn't do, but what you do with it. I know we do research with it. I was just speaking at a grassroots organization last week up in Lake County, and was actually showing them the website and saying, this is the data points you can do locally. How do you envision being able to, over time, whether it's through Common Cause, other organizations you're with, being able to look at that trend lines, and would you publish reports or use that as you work with other policymakers down at the State House to converse with how local governments are kind of operating, what maybe we can do about making things as effective and efficient as possible?
So you all probably know I'm a professional nudge. Don't get anxious. In other words, I spent most of my life trying to encourage government to do something really specific. And I think that what happens at the beginning of this has to do with like, okay, we're giving more information to the people that make our lives at city council meetings or our lives at a variety of different committee hearings. We might be giving them more information more easily, which might make it more difficult to work with them. But in fact, I do believe that what happens is that you have a better understanding of what's actually happening. And if you're also able to look at trends over time, any of the advocates that are out there, in townships meetings or whatever, they will have the ability to better understand the why. And the trends really have to do with the why. So that, in fact, when you're advocating for whether it's more responsible government, or you're out there and you say, hey, somebody mentioned the parks earlier, hey, I really care about the parks. I don't really quite understand why this trail isn't taken care of. There's a better understanding of, well, what are the expenditures, and you can start to advocate from a place of knowledge and a place of understanding how things work, rather than just kind of barreling in. So I actually think it's going to help, advocates that are out there whether it's small towns or city halls, to actually advocate in a much more knowledgeable way. And that actually will make it easier for our elected officials as well. Because if citizens are coming with a better knowledge base, a little bit more information, then the conversations are going to be much more productive.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that, because I know that a lot of times you'll have folks who think they know something about what's going on. The constituents will come and they'll say something at a city council meeting or a commissioner's meeting or something like that. But they don't really know. They have sort of some kind of a sense that there's something going on, and they think there's too much money being spent, and stuff like that. So I think it is important, because that contextualizes the information. I actually, is that Representative Duffy over there? I thought I saw him just walk in. So yeah, it was going to be a busy day today. So come on, you know what? Come on up here. Yeah, I'm going to use the moderator prerogative here. So.
Hey, here's this.
Hello.
It's good to see you.
So, Representative Duffy, welcome here. We've been chatting a little bit about how we onboard information, the working with the Treasurer's Office, and we've kind of moved into the phase of talking about how you can use trends and data over time to use the data that's there. And I think the Treasurer's Office has been doing such excellent work. Since we have a little bit of a conversation about Data Ohio, and perhaps after today's events, we'll see what the legislature does anything. But this is a great idea. You've been working on it for at least, 5 years at least, maybe longer?
Since 2011, really, actually.
Really,
yeah.
since he started crafting it. So really his entire time in office. And this is a great idea, and we need to continue to work on it. But talk about how Data Ohio kind of, it's a little bit different because of the standardization stuff, but how you envision it with the trends and the ability for people to get access to it, companies to get access to it, and then how that builds upon sort of how the Treasurer's Open Ohio or checkbook works on that.
Right. So the idea is that on all the value add that people can add to it, so they will create companies or researchers want to do things, we're speeding time to the final product, whether it's a visualization or whether it's some kind of, it could even be a piece of software that somebody's figured out how to monetize. The raw data itself, just like public records, are free and available for everyone. And the obstacle that exists today, for example, I remember Susan Ackerman testified about when she was with, the Center for Community Solutions, maybe doing research on Medicaid caseloads. Oftentimes today, people have to request that data, and they get it in the form of a PDF of a spreadsheet, and then you're retyping that spreadsheet in, and that makes a project for a journalist or for a researcher or for somebody who wanted to create a startup company, that makes a project 6 months for one person. And you know this well, trying to digitize state salaries and trying to do public records requests to get that.
Ones in particular too. Yeah.
The reality is that what we need that data to be in is machine readable format, standardized online. If we get those three things so that people know what the taxonomy is, the definitions. If it's there online, you're not asking somebody, can I have the data? And then you have to argue with them back and forth like it's a public records request. And it's machine readable, so you can have an API that goes out and just grabs it and automatically streams it on an ongoing basis. Then from there, anything as a possibility opens up. And we don't have to worry about, we do have to worry about sometimes about how it's used. Like, I'll give you an example. Right now in the state of Ohio, how many people have gotten a robocall from a politician to their cell phone because you registered to vote absentee? The reality is that although that database is not published online, that data is all public record. And the campaigns know this, and so they get it. The body of public records law, what's public record and what's not, is a separate body of law. And so oftentimes people on open data are kind of confusing, well, you're going to make something public that's not public already. And it's like, no, it was already public already. People have already figured out how to get to it. If you don't want it to be published online, it's actually a reminder that maybe that thing shouldn't be public record. I know the Newspaper Association probably wouldn't like to hear this, but I don't think my cell phone number for an absentee ballot should really be part of the public record. I didn't put my phone number on there so that it could be called by campaigns, right? So those are the three things that we need. And once we have those things, entrepreneurs, journalists, and I think it's really important in this current environment because all the newspapers are shutting down their investigative research, and especially on a day like today and whatever's going on at the State House right now, we need journalists to expose what's going on in politics. And if we've made it so that they can't do the project because it takes an entire team of reporters, if we can shrink that to a small amount, we're going to have more public interest research, we're going to have better accountability, and then I think really people are going to be able to come up with, for-profit ideas that are going to start businesses in Ohio.
And I know this has been a big vision of yours, and we will continue to obviously keep working and trying to do a drumbeat on this because local government, the issues of local government are very important because one of the things that I struggle with, and maybe I'll have you comment on that, is we were talking about trend lines, but there's also the comparative information. We've kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think this is something, Ohio, there was a great story in the Cleveland Plain Dealer yesterday about Ohio and how Ohio has had job creation numbers below the national average, basically for the last 50 years plus, if you followed all the links in the article. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for this. And what does this have to do with data and transparency? Well, as I've done a lot of research, we have a very interesting and complicated local government system here. And this isn't meant to be negative to any particular entity. It's just a statement that we have, as Frank mentioned, over 3,000 different kinds of, and those are like the townships and the schools and the counties and the municipalities. But there's also a myriad of other entities. There's separate library districts and councils of government and all. It boggles the mind when you look at all the various entities that there are out there. So one of the things that data would seem to me is the ability to reference and have be able to look across different jurisdictions and have as much as you can apples to apples comparisons. So it's trend lines with a particular entity for sure, but it's also the ability to say, are we doing things the right way in our local community compared to other communities that are maybe of a similar nature, demographically or geographically and things like that. Can you talk about how data might, and I think you touched a little bit on it, but how to use that a little bit across not just trend lines within governments, but across different jurisdictions?
I'll start with, I served on Worthington City Council for 5 years, and through multiple city manager administrations, and at the time, and this is very common in cities, I think, is to do a survey of their citizens and ask, how are we doing? And it's a self-selecting sample. You get a postcard back, and we're very satisfied with police services. Trash pickup's doing okay. We don't like the traffic, that kind of thing. It's not really an objective measurement. We would spend a lot of time at public hearings talking about how we were doing such a great job, and we were one of the best communities in Ohio. I couldn't tell you for the life of me whether we were cheaper than the next community over on what we paid per ton of road salt. And there's not the ability to do that. Right now, if you ask a city manager in your hometown to do that analysis, they do it by hand. Oftentimes, they went to public policy school with somebody who's a city manager in another town that's not necessarily a peer comparison to your town, and they just call them up because they have a relationship. So they call 7 people, you get a little sheet of paper and it says, here's our benchmark comparisons. That's not actual benchmarking. We have 900 plus municipalities in Ohio. We have 1,300 townships. We have 600 school districts. If we had standardized data and we had all the raw data, I think people couldn't hide behind patting ourselves on the back for what we're doing, because the data wouldn't lie on what you pay per ton of road salt. And it would start to prompt questions. City council members and the governance system is only as smart as what data has presented to it. Kind of like if we didn't have the nonpartisan Legislative Service Commission in the legislature to check us on budget estimates, I mean, can you imagine how the legislature would operate? You need that. Congress needs the GAO. And I just think that that's the possibility that it opens, and it very quickly allows you to identify communities that you've never even heard of before, and you just want to ask the question, how did you get it that cheap? It also begs the question as to how do we share services? Because if people see that communities with economies of scale are able to save money, and they can do that voluntarily, which is a huge point of this, which is, everyone knows Ohio, because of agrarian history, has all these townships and all these cities. We just have way more fragmented local government than other states. And if you look at aggregate tax burden, we've gone down on state taxation, but the municipalities will even say you're pushing us up on taxation because we're trying to make up the difference of whatever the legislature's not funding us. So is that attractive for an out-of-state business if the aggregate tax burden stayed the same? And we know the only way that we can solve that is through efficiency. We also know, I think politically, it's not going to work for the legislature to tell 2 communities to merge together. And not every time do mergers actually result in savings, by the way. Sometimes it's a marrying up, and all the expenses actually go to the higher of the 2 partners that married together. And so
Did you read one of my reports on that?
What's that?
Did you read one of my reports on that? Because I had a report.
Oh,
that
did you
said
do
exactly
a
that
report on
years
that?
ago now? Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a real consideration. I think if the legislature forces what we perceive to be reform, it could go badly. But if we allow objective, non-political data to be presented, I think that people will make better decisions about that. So the benchmarking is really important. We can't do it until the taxonomy is the same. We don't have a uniform chart of accounts for municipalities in Ohio. Most townships are on the UAN, which is through the auditor's office. That's good. School districts have had universal accounting for forever. What's strange is we actually have it for agricultural societies, in the revised code has a uniform chart of accounts, believe it or not. I looked up Uniform Chart of Accounts, Ohio Revised Code, and I found one hit, other than schools. So those things are kind of interesting. In states like Georgia, in the mid-'90s, a gubernatorial administration came along and said, for pure compliance, for oversight, for simplicity, we're going to have a uniform chart of accounts for everybody, for all local governments. And it wasn't, as far as I could tell, I couldn't find a single article showing that it was politically controversial or not. I think,
Might be a little different here.
Well, I think what we're going to get to here in Ohio is there's fights among people about who gets to be the leader on transparency. Everyone wants to be the leader on it, and they fight amongst themselves. And then part of it is that there's no money behind it, right? Like, it's kind of it's just plain good government stuff. And if you said, I'm going to invent the internet, nobody would have funded that initially. It just kind of had to happen. And then after they got it, everyone said, oh, this is really valuable. But I don't think initially there's a very large lobby for it. So it's all the wonky government types like ourselves that are pushing for it right now.
But I think, again, that kind of goes to the credit of what you're doing and what the Treasurer's Office has done by taking that and making it easy. And what Justin was saying a number of times was it's an easy onboarding. It's free to basically use to the city, so there's not that cost there. And the service with the interactivity there that you have with members of the Treasurer's staff has been extremely helpful. So the good thing is that facilitation of the onboarding, which was kind of one of the big topics of this particular session, was, how does the Treasurer work? How do you do with the onboarding of data? And I think that kind of closing the full circle is that becomes a key element in being able to keep this thing rolling out and being able to continue to have access to that information, because it is something that's not, you can't just mandate it from on high, but as it organically happens and as you have some of the leaders take advantage of it, you facilitate that process for the government so it's not like pulling teeth. And I think that's really, really important here. So, and again, I'm just going to do a real quick time check. Sean, where are we at? Okay, so I guess we've had one question from the floor. Does anybody else have any questions from the floor for anybody that's up here? We were so scintillating. Maybe we should do the interpretive dance or something like that. So let me just go ahead and is there anything else that any of our guests would like to say here before we close down the panel?
I'd just like to thank the Treasurer's staff. They've been incredibly helpful on both initiatives I've worked on. They'll call you on the phone. They'll come out to your offices. So again, thank you to the Treasurer's office.
Oh, and I also wanted to say thank you to everyone, and I'm so glad that we're here today talking about one of my favorite topics, because if you don't have transparent government, you're not actually we the people, and thank you.
And I'll just say, you know, from my perspective, it would be easy to say you're term limited, Mike, and Dade, Ohio hasn't become law yet. Do you feel cynical about it, or are you discouraged? And I would say no, because we've made a lot of progress. A lot of the groups that were initially behind-the-scenes opponents, not publicly opponents, usually people are not publicly opponents of transparency, but behind the scenes they have, well, this will be used as a weapon against us, and it'll be unfairly used, and people will argue about the data and whether it's accurate and all of those kinds of things, that over time, just from exposure to the conversation, they've all kind of become more positive about it. And there are macro trends that are going on in terms of bond financing that's available for cities that require certain levels of transparency that I think are lending themselves to this. And the more we have these kinds of events and the more we come together as a coalition as opposed to just all doing it on our own, we're getting closer and we have a shot with the next administration and the next, you know, legislature. So.
Well, I just want to say thank you, and I want to say thanks to Sean as well for helping to put this together, because I think this is, I know from my perspective at the Buckeye Institute, we've kind of come to the conclusion that local government and issues at the local level are, kind of echoing what Representative Duffy said, are one of the most important issues, but it's a below-the-radar issue for most people. It doesn't get a lot of the top-tier headlines, but it's something that has to be dealt with, and we really can't crack that nut until we have the information. And that's why it's so good to see folks who are being able to help out so much with making this a reality. And we don't want this to stop. You know, Representative Duffy, wish he could be around a little bit longer here. So maybe he'll come back in a few years. He might not want to be here anymore. I don't know. But this is really important stuff, and we thank everybody for doing it, and that we urge everybody to kind of link arms, from academics to government officials to you know, activists, to be able to do this.
Greg, did you notice I moved to your left?
You know, I was going to say, I know that's funny there. You know, she always makes fun of me. We are a little bit of the odd couple. So
I guess what I would highlight is.
But that's the purpose. Not
Common Cause Ohio, Buckeye.
Bipartisan, nonpartisan. It's great.
Bipartisan, nonpartisan. The whole notion of you can come at transparency from the left, the right, the middle.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. And that's a great message to take back to folks as you work with your local government officials and work with other people to make this a reality. So thank you.
Thank you to our panel.